Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to have that awkward 30 seconds as people get into the main room. Lovely to see you all this afternoon. 30 seconds and then we shall get going. How you doing, Rob? Good to see you.
I'm brilliant, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got that beaming smile. Very good week for you, I hear.
Yeah, we've been very, very busy. So announcing a few acquisitions and continuing with our global expansion. So very exciting times.
Awesome, mate. We're waiting. Seven Stars is still waiting for you to ring our doorbell, mate.
You may not be waiting so long. You know, somebody told me we're buying companies like she buys shoes. She said to me, Nishma from Google. So it's
yeah,
it's
this has got a lot of shoes. How you doing, Colette? Good to see you.
I'm good, thank you. I'm liking being back at MEFA Matters again. It's been a while.
Yeah, awesome. We're glad to have you. I can tell from our chat before we started, you got the fire in your belly today as well. I'm excited about it. It's good. And Frank, thank you for joining us. It's your first time. Appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, I'm a newbie, so be kind and gentle with me, but I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. And Dino, another old face. I shouldn't say that. I need to come up with a better way of calling you an old face, don't I? How are you, buddy?
Wise face, please. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. My face may be made a little bit younger if my kids decide to invade during the broadcast, but hopefully they won't.
No, it's fine. We were all just saying that everyone's got people and dogs and various bits and pieces around them. So that is working from home. So we'll give everyone another 5 seconds and then we will get going. So this is where we need our whole music, Dino. Haven't you got your ukulele? Okay. How are we doing? Colette, have you raised your hand there already? We've got Naren in the audience. Hi, Naren. Good to see you, mate. Okay, I think we're going to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Liam Mullins of the Seven Stars, and welcome to this week's or this month's MEFA Matters. Hopefully, everyone is starting to feel more positive. What's been a really difficult lockdown for many people, been battered mentally, physically, work has been crazy, and we've been doing it all at home on our own. It's not been easy, but what with brighter weather and Boris's announcement, hopefully we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully that's given everyone a bit of a fill up and we can start to look forward. Media for All was set up in 2017 by Naren Patel, and the whole aim of our organisation is to really help recruit and retain people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities to the advertising industry. So alongside those two pillars, we also really focus on how we can help people of colour rise within the industry. I think the thing for us is when people join advertising, when they join media, sales side, creative, whatever it might be, we want people to look up and see more people that look like them in positions of influence. And right now, that's definitely not the case. So MEFA Matters was born to really drive change and help keep momentum in the industry. We all made loads of pledges last year. We wanted this to be a panel where we can have an open discussion and open conversation. It's a bit of a safe space where you can ask questions anonymously, or obviously with your real name, and we can all debate and discuss topics without fear of being judged or using the wrong language. We've talked before about not everyone gets it right all the time, but if you're coming from the right place, that's all good with us. What we're talking about today is, at the beginning of February, there was an article in the BBC, and Trevor Phillips, who's the chair of a consultancy called Green Park, he announced this research findings that said for the first time in 6 years, there are no Black chairs, chief execs or finance chiefs within the entirety of the FTSE 100. And we here at Media for All think that's an absolute disgrace. I tell my kids I wasn't going to swear today, so we'll just say that's a disgrace. And in fact, when you looked at the Green Park research, there are only 10 of nearly 300 people holding any C-suite titles who are from an ethnic minority background. And I think, when we think about the year we had last year, the aftermath of the, awful George Floyd murder and lots of more atrocities that happened, a resurgent BLM and loads of noise from businesses and claims of change, how can we be a year on and stats like this be so pervasive in today's society? So that's what we're talking about today. How can we move the dial when it comes to progression, when it comes to development? How do the handful of people that do make it in business get there? And why is it so bloody hard? And more importantly, what do organisations need to do to reverse that really depressing stat? So today's guests represent brilliant Black leaders from the advertising industry and beyond, and they're going to give us some real valuable insight into their own experience and what they're doing to drive change, both in their own organisations, but perhaps more importantly, in the wider world and in wider society. I'm nearly done, but I just wanted to say a quick note on safeguarding. So, you know, we talk about issues of varying types, and sometimes people said they get triggered or they're finding things hard. We've partnered with NABS. NABS is a brilliant organisation for anyone in advertising, and they've got a brilliant advice line, and also they've got a great email help desk. I guess it's called a help desk, who can help if you're feeling triggered or you need any support or anything that we're talking about today. So I've just dropped that in the chat box. And I guess what's left for me to do is introduce today's panel. So those of you early birds who are on, we've got Frank Douglas here. He's an absolute inspiration. When we said we were talking about that stat, Dino said to me, he said, look, if you're going to talk about the lack of representation in FTSE 100 or C-suite, Frank's your man. He's the guy who's got an absolute brilliant opinion. So Frank's absolute giving up his time to be here today. I really appreciate it. He's a CIPD chartered companion and he's the CEO of Cirrus Executive. I hope I said that right. And if you've listened to any Frank's brilliant talks, obviously, you know, you'll be really eager to hear Frank's take on this topic. So hiya, Frank. We've got Rob. Hi, mates. We've got Rob Pierre. Rob is the co-founder and CEO of Jellyfish, who are a global partner in digital marketing transformation to lots and lots of leading brands. I thought we'd be running out of time if I named them all, Rob, but Rob is absolutely taken over the world. He employs over 2,000 people across 40 offices globally, and it's great to have him on today's show. Hi, mate. We've got Colette. Colette, as I say, has got a fire in her belly today. She's an absolutely brilliant person who's the founder of award-winning brand consultancy for social change, Brand by Me. She's director of mentoring for Media for All. And right now, Colette's top priority is really helping companies embed anti-racism at the heart of their brand strategy, which, you know, we're seeing a lot of brands talk about, but she's absolutely making sure they do it with real authenticity. So thanks for joining today, Colette. Give us a wave. And then finally, I got told off for calling him an old. My wise friend Dino, who has been a friend for many years, is founder of a brilliant agency called The Barbershop, and he's also the co-chair of the Alliance of Independent Agencies. And I know Dino's doing a lot of great stuff in this space. So hi, Dino. I always say I'm not going to go on forever, and I always talk for far too long. So apologies in advance. So thanks everyone for joining today. If you've got questions, really important. We want this to be an opportunity for people to ask questions of any of these brilliant people. You don't want to hear from me. You absolutely want to hear from those guys. So if you've got questions we're going through, pop it in the Q&A. Sometimes people say the picture's getting away, or you can choose the view that you've got in the top right-hand side as well. So choose a view that works for you. And let's get going. So enough from me. Frank, I'm going to start off with you. So based on the stats we've talked about, what is actually going on here? What is the root cause of this issue? How can numbers be at the lowest for 6 years? What is it that's happening that is causing this lack of momentum, lack of movement, would you say?
Yeah. So thanks, Liam. So first thing is, it's interesting we say the numbers at their lowest. They've always been low. So the headline makes it sound like we've gone from this abundance of 100 to 0. We've probably gone from 3 to 0 in terms of CEOs. I don't think there's ever been a black chair, and I don't think there's been a black CFO. So it's probably 3 to 0. That's the lowest point. And the other thing I would just say, because I am in some ways I'm part of that statistic and concern, is that I've been the only black male chief people officer of a FTSE 50 company. There's only been one black male chief people officer of FTSE 50. That's me. And I've been out of the corporate world for 7 years. So there was no one to pass the baton to me, and no one in 7 years for me to pass the baton. So I think what's happening is two things, and I'm going to dissect it into the head and the heart. So the first issue, I think, is the gold-plated consultancies of McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Harvard, Wharton. You pick one. They've all come out with research that has stated that if you crack ethnic diversity and gender diversity, which is interesting because most people just quote the gender diversity number, particularly from the McKinsey study. They forget that there's another side to the McKinsey study. McKinsey says you're 35% more likely to outperform your competitors. Harvard says you're 70% more likely to get emerging markets, and Boston Consulting Group has cash flow and EBITDA competitor advantages. Compelling numbers from companies that, consulting firms that company pay millions of pounds to. If McKinsey says turn left, the world turns left. In this case, in this one case, we have all this data, and the thing that I toss and turn with is, why don't they believe the data? This is the one situation where you have the oracles of management science saying you can outperform your competitors, and they don't believe the data is the one assumption. So it then leads me to what's the hard issue? We haven't won the head issue clearly, even though it's compelling, and that's where it gets a little tricky, because I think the challenge for the organizations when it comes to Black executives is they don't know us. I say every white male executive knows a white female. Females are part of their personal orbit, and females are part of their personal orbit. Probably the first contact a chief executive has with a Black person is Monday morning when they enter their office building. And the last contact they probably have is Friday when they leave. So we're not part of their personal orbit. We're not part of their professional orbit. And that distance creates a stereotype, a discomfort, and there's no social accountability. If you're a white executive, you have white female friends, you have daughters, you have mothers, you have sisters, you're at the dinner table. You sit there with the social accountability. I want my sister or daughter, aunt to be promoted, to be treated fairly. There is no social accountability in general for most executives when it comes to Black staff. The other challenge, and it's an ecosystem part, is that as the report has stated, most FTSE boards are overwhelmingly white. The C-suite is overwhelmingly white, and the HR profession is overwhelmingly white. So you have basically a white HR profession trying to speak to a white C-suite, being advised by a white board about what do we do about Black folks. Well, that's kind of like four people who've never ridden a horse trying to teach the fifth person
Grand National, yeah.
how to ride a horse. So you have a host of things in play there. And then the last is that I don't believe, my clients notwithstanding, and they range from some of the good and great, but I don't believe that most CEOs actually have an emotional attachment to the Black and Asian progression agenda. They just don't have the emotional attachment. So when you don't have the emotional attachment, you have two options. You can reject the agenda outright, which is not tenable, or you give it lukewarm acceptance, which is you provide the most minimum things you can do to get away with it.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line, I think here, Liam, is that they can't do outright rejection. And so what we're seeing the results of is lukewarm acceptance by the C-suite to this topic, because it takes effort, it takes time to change. And if you don't feel it, you don't have a connection to it, you just kind of do it and get it off the agenda. So I'll stop there and let my other panelists speak. But it's a host of things, but not just one thing.
But you know what, Frank? I think your whole point about it being, you've got your head. We've not cracked it because the stats are pervasive and are clear wherever you look. But you've got the heartbeat, and I think that social accountability thing is so clear that if you look around in your own sphere of influence, your own friendship group, and they don't look any different to you.
Yeah.
So somehow we need to take a sledgehammer to crack through and break some of these social norms. I guess, Rob, a question for you. You've obviously built this awesome business. You're a great Black CEO. You're a great CEO, right? Maybe we don't even need to prefix it with that word. But what do you think? How do you break this head and heart challenge? And what do you do at Jellyfish, or what do you think the industry needs to do to start changing the numbers that we've talked about here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a privileged position to say I'm going to talk to you about what we have done, not what we could do and what we should do. So that's a great thing. I think it's systemic. I think I'm not going to repeat everything Frank said. I mean, and full agreement. But I think what we've done at Jellyfish is we've literally broken the whole system, and it's a big proof of concept. We've got 2,000 people across 40 global offices. That's a lot of people, and the change curve, it's definitely been a big paradigm shift. And when I talk about break the system, it is literally creating the opportunity and the empowerment within our organization. And it's not just equality. I mean, I'm talking about the equity and then identifying things you need to do give the opportunity and the empowerment to the communities and the underprivileged, the underprivileged communities that don't have access to what we take for granted. And I'm in a very strange situation where I think if I look back, I'm more a product of the privilege that I did have. So I don't represent what we're trying to fix here. Yeah. And I'm just showing that ambition and talent, or, the drive, the enthusiasm, the intelligence, all of these things, our Black communities have them, and Asian communities, any of the BAME communities have it in droves. So what I'm looking at is, as an example, where we had heads of, and in an organization like ours, I don't want to penalize the people that have got our business to where we are today. I don't want to have to displace people within our organization to change the profile of what our C-suite and what our senior management looks like. So what we've done is we've taken away the concept of line managers, we've taken away the pyramids, we've taken away the heads of, which in most organizations are going to be white males predominantly. Yeah. And what we've done is we've said, okay, we're going to create a steering group for that function. And you may be the most senior person in that steering group, but we will have distributed accountability. And it means all of the next tier of management and the ambitious young people that can then be extremely diverse can actually come into that group and get the exposure. Because I think the exposure and the opportunity are the big challenges right now. And we talk about that pipeline and people coming through. Who do you pass the baton to? Those are the things that are really important. So in our organization, we've suddenly opened it up to a whole group of people to start to get that exposure, to contribute, to be strategic, and to start practicing all of the skills and the capabilities that are required to be a successful C-suite executive. Because that's the other thing we can't take for granted, is that we also don't want to set people up to fail. We don't want token Black or Asian or ethnic minority people in these positions, and then they haven't been given the opportunity to succeed. So that's one side of it. And it is about, it may seem innocuous, but the taking away of the line management concept is stopping that suppression, where people, if you're threatened, you suppress others around you to elevate yourself. And what we want to make sure is that everybody has their own trajectory, and it's a vertical one. And you just take it on and you do it, you do it yourself. And so within that, within our organization, we found that we're seeing a lot of these opportunities. We do all the usual things, like where you make sure your delegate pool is the right mix. I don't actually want to do Black initiatives, for example. I don't want to have to specifically target Black people or Asian people or even females. What I want to do is go to the environments where those communities are and show them what's possible. And so whether that's going and talking about our organization by just being an example. And again, I'm humble in the sense that I have had the privilege. I actually have not been constrained on my journey. And I haven't had to be employed in these positions. I haven't had to be promoted in an organization. I had this opportunity, but the opportunity with Jellyfish started with a privileged scenario. Yeah. And I had an environment, I had people who supported me, backed me, and I was able to continue to grow this business. And the same problem we've got in organizations, the systemic problem we've got, will be the same if we ask Black individuals to go and start their own businesses. Mm-hmm. They need financing, they need support, they need market confidence. And so again, if we've managed to do it, we need to actually just show what were the steps, and use our privilege to create those opportunities and to lead by example. And I'm gonna finish. I could speak for 2 hours on what we've actually done within the organization, but I'll start with what you said at the beginning. And you're right. I would love, and I'm very ambitious and very proud of our organization, and I would love to be considered a really good CEO who happens to be Black. And that's what I want everyone out there to see. Now, that's not to say I'm not going to address the issues and look at that equity side of things. And I can't stress enough, equality is giving everybody the same opportunity, but identifying that your dialect or the fact that it's challenging to travel to work, that you don't have the clothing that makes you feel like you fit in, or you just don't have the support, you don't have the technical equipment. All of those things, it's not just giving somebody the same opportunity, it's getting everybody to a level where they can exploit the same opportunity. And that's what we're spending a lot of time doing.
And you know what, Rob, you're right, that is what equity is. And what I love about what you've talked about is by giving, number one, that middle management, that, having job titles, whatever it might be, that BS, and just scrapping it and just giving more people exposure, sharing responsibility. What you're forcing is what Frank was talking about, which is the lack of social accountability, the lack of being in teams where there's people that aren't like you, that don't like you. So by forcing that to happen, you kind of are breaking down a bit of that heart piece, because everyone's opinion counts, right? A good idea can come from anywhere. It's, you don't have to force it through this old-fashioned hierarchy pyramids that are just, very old-fashioned.
I'll tell you one last thing, sorry, because this is probably the icing on the cake, is that with the way in which we actually promote people within Jellyfish now, because we don't have the line managers, we have leadership but not line managers, everybody submits a business case and you've got a support network that helps you, and it's all outcome based. And this is exactly how we run for all of our people right now. Yeah. And the thing about it is that your support network helps you build a case, and by the time it gets to the panel to be assessed, it's completely anonymized. That you do not know. You could be 21, 55, white, black, male, female, no one, you could be in Barcelona or Mumbai, no one knows. You look at the outcomes, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about assessing people on the value exchange, their talent, their capabilities, their ambition, the outcomes, not just their output. And that way we have no constraints and everybody can just achieve and progress, and we will see that diversity naturally happen by going straight to the systemic problem.
Yeah, no, love it, Rob. And like the last thing on that is that, when you hear people talk about, working from home or being more flexible, everyone's like, it's taken bloody COVID to make people realize there's a different way of working. It takes big things to make change happen, but we have to force that change. We have to, why work like we worked 80 years ago, 100 years ago? And that's what it sounds like you're doing. Colette, I'm going to come to you. Rob's talked massively, and I'm sure we'll hear more of his initiatives, but, what do we do to make sure the people coming in are the right, we're getting the right people at the start? It sounds like we have to have numbers. Do we think about, making we've got certain targets at certain levels? What do you think we need to do to sort of drive that?
Yeah, I have to say, when you sent me the question of what should organisations have mandatory numbers, I was cursing you, Liam, because I was like, why on earth am I going to be able to answer this? And then I went to an amazing event. I was telling the rest of the panel, I went to this amazing event on Tuesday, hosted by MediaCom, where they shared very openly their diversity and inclusion journey. And they had Debbie Klein from Sky share how they use targets. And I thought it's absolutely brilliant way of not just why to do it, but also how. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the first thing is, I've always been a big fan of targets for exactly the reasons that Frank pointed to, is that he said, and I loved it, he said, like, CEOs, boards, HR people don't have an emotional attachment. They don't have this emotional commitment. So you see lukewarm tick boxing, or you see people just rejecting this altogether. Where you have targets, concrete organizational wide targets, not quotas, but certainly organizational targets that are based on something, it removes that, it creates that what we call skin in the game. It gives people something really tangible to aim for, and also drives accountability because you have to meet it. So I've always been a fan of targets, because I know people fear them, and there are some challenges within it, but I'm going to use the Sky example to talk about how you kind of counter those. But fundamentally, what we've just talked about, I'd love, like, we should have, like, every CEO be like, Rob, these are the really tangible initiatives, understanding the value of equity, but everybody's not there. People just aren't there for the reasons Frank has said. So targets give people a reason to make sure that the change happens, that there's a momentum, that when, for example, Frank leaves, it doesn't set the numbers back because there's just one. All of these things, having targets to work for really helps. So I guess my 3 practical points around targets and setting them are, the first one is use data you have and proxy data if you don't to set them. And I say this, it sounds really obvious, but I see it too often in my work that I do when I encounter organizations, and even historically when I used to work in-house, I see when these targets are set, it's just kind of finger in the air. People are like, okay, this. Or so-and-so organization said that, so we're going to do the same. Absolutely not. So using the example of Sky, they used population data combined with employee retention and churn data, and they came up with an organizational target, which is 20 and 5 in 2025, which means 20% of their workforce will be from Black, Asian, and other minoritized communities by 2025. Of that 20%, 5% will specifically be Black people. That's what they've done, and they used it. So that's their overall target. They've then broken it down by different regions. So they, for example, in Scotland, they have some different numbers just because of the population figures look different there. And also then, but in London, those numbers look different, right? And then they've also looked at it by departments. So they've got, for example, a leadership number, because when they looked at their population numbers, they were actually in line with general population. It was like 13%, Black, Asian, and other minoritized communities. It was about 13%. And they looked at their data and were like, oh yeah, our workforce equally 13%. But they weren't complacent about that number. They dug deep. And what they found was in London, quite specifically, where, I think their head office or whatever, a lot of their offices are, a lot of their workforce is, they were under indexing on what should be the level of Black, Asian, and other minoritized communities in the workforce, and also in leadership, way down. So when they looked at that, so by setting the number, they had a broad number, but they also then were able to break it down, which makes it very tangible. The second thing they did, which was really good, which is my second piece of advice, be super clear internally and externally about why you're setting the targets, what they are and what they're not. So for example, Sky, and I think we've already touched on it, Rob touched on it, is that you don't want these targets to result in tokenism. Sky was super clear about that. So when they've launched these targets, they've said, it is about equity, about breaking down barriers for Black, Asian, and other minoritized ethnic groups to enter and progress within our workplace. But this is not about tokenism. We're not about tokenism or about setting quotas. And by being really clear and addressing that head on, and then I'll come on to my third point, but being clear about what it is and addressing this head on, it helps people, they call it out and say no. So when people say, oh, targets will lead to tokenism, they're like, no, absolutely not about tokenism. And then the third thing, and then I'll stop, is that actually the targets are, good to make things visible and tangible, but alone they mean absolutely nothing. So some of the stuff that Rob said, like in his very tangible action plans, are absolutely needed. You need stuff to support your targets, action plans, not just one thing, but action plans that work at multiple levels. So our MEFA sort of pillars work really well for this, right? Rise, recruit, and retain. Quite often people, when they're looking at this, will simply look at the recruitment end of it. And someone gave me a really good phrase for this, which is that if you only look at recruitment, people coming into the organization, and also only look at recruitment at sort of an entry level and bringing people in, it's where people start, because I've heard that it's sort of the easiest thing to do. What you end up having organizations that resemble a pint of Guinness. So it's good and blackity black until you get to the top levels, and then there's just this layer of whiteness. Sorry if people are offended by that, but it is true, right? You see that in lots of organizations. So you need to have your kind of recruit absolutely at all levels. Your retain. So something about, and this was again some of the stuff that Rob spoke to in terms of making sure that you are sort of being inclusive and breaking down some of those barriers, like Rob's removed gatekeepers within the organization. That will help the retention piece, because people won't feel like they're silenced and like they're fitting walls. Really important. And there's lots of other stuff around that in terms of inclusion and culture. And then the third piece is rise. So looking at how then that's that pipeline piece in terms of how you are helping, making sure that your organization doesn't end up being a pint of Guinness, but you are actually addressing that horrendous stat that we're here to discuss today. So they're the three kind of bits. And yes, targets are good. Use the data that you have to make sure they're real, achievable but ambitious. Be clear on what they are, why you're doing it, and what they're not. and also make sure they are supported and fueled by a very, very tangible action plan that addresses specific issues within your organization. And then my final thing, Rob said it and I'll say it again because I love it, equity, not equality, because actually we understand that this is structural and there are very significant barriers that are preventing people of color and people from minoritized ethnic backgrounds from progressing into these roles. So we really need to make sure that our solutions in are kind of about equity too. And that's all I'm going to. Oh, final one, be transparent about it. Sorry, that's the big thing for me. When you've got your numbers and you're setting your targets, be transparent and open about it. Otherwise, there's no accountability. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. I think the piece about being transparent is super important, right? Because there's a lot of organisations I'm hearing that are scared, they're nervous about declaring what their numbers are because they're going to look bad, right? And that's not that they're bad because they're awful people or they're not trying hard to make this different or trying to drive it forward, but they're going to look bad, right? So what I think we need to do is once we've declared our numbers, I think the census, the all-in thing that's happening on the 10th of March is going to help with this. I think we should start to measure the direction of travel, not get fixated on that number. If your number's not great and you're acknowledging it, fine. If your number's not great, next year it's not great, not fine, right? I think, Frank, you're right to pick me up and go, actually, you know, there's none. It's not that there was 100 and they've all left. There was pretty much none before, right? So it's a good pull up. I think I saw a really interesting, I don't even think it was Instagram, but it was on Twitter, and your Guinness analogy, it was like lots of emojis of what boards are made up of. And, you know, it was like person, 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 and whether it was gender, whether it was racial, you know, an emoji, it is that, you know, the fact that most businesses are led by white people, white men, and it's something we all are here to change. Dino, thank you for being so patient, Dino. It must be, that's hard for Dino as well to be patient for half an hour, trust me. So thank you.
You on Zoom?
Say again? It is easier on Zoom, fine. Dino, a couple of things, you know, it'd be good to hear your point, your view on what Colette's talked about around tangible, you know, action plans and, you know, don't be worrying about tokenism. We've had a couple of questions on that, but I guess you've talked about, you know, this initiative about diverse boards, and I think it's something that you're getting off the ground, have got off the ground. So it'd be good just to hear your general view on both of those elements, if you could.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. You know, I love a strategy. Obviously, that's what the business does. So I'm never going to knock a strategy, but I think there's far too many strategies that are always talked about on this subject, and very little action, and very little actually achieved. And I think that you know, it's almost like you know, this is probably the worst kind of like, you know, strategic plan that, you know, we constantly talk about, and no improvements. Always the figures seem to be going in the wrong direction. And I think that, you know, particularly in our industry, you know, we have a bit of a unique kind of point of view. And it occurred to me a few years ago when you know, people would, I think a few years ago, it was probably the first time in my career that somebody actually asked me about, they were looking for a senior person of diversity, you know, for a position, for a job. And it's one of those things that, you know, when you're, you know, in a position and, you know, in agencies or so, and, you know, you're in that kind of like head role or chief kind of strategy officer role, you know, it occurred to me that, you know, if people are actually looking for diversity, then I should probably be aware of every single job that's out there in that kind of role, because, you know, why wouldn't they ask? Why wouldn't they kind of go, you know, do you know anyone? You know, I mean, it's an obvious way to kind of like go and try and navigate towards getting a more diverse pool. You know, you should at least be trying to start off with, you know, maximizing the diversity at that kind of early stage interview level. Everyone claims that, you know, oh, there's not enough candidates and whatever else. No, actually, they're not trying hard enough, because until we're at a situation where, you know, I'm getting all the CSO jobs on offer, you know, to at least look at them. Colette's getting all the brand, you know, jobs as well. You know, you're getting all the head of trading jobs, you know, and at least going, oh, yeah, hang on a minute, you know, I'm not ready to move yet, but, you know, I know someone that might be. Unless we got to that situation, you know, the people are not really trying hard enough, are they? And so I think that the thing is, I mean, you know, a lot of the, you know, the stats and everything, it's really interesting, because I think there's, you know, those McKinsey stats, it reminded me a little bit, as Frank was talking about them, a little bit like the whole advertising problem of how we try and sell in the benefit of advertising to companies all the time. And we're always kind of trying to say, you know, yeah, advertising is going to increase your return. It's great, it's great, it's great. And we're all there knowing the benefit of advertising. But meanwhile, the businesses are going, oh, yeah, but no, it's a risk. It's a risk. You know, I'm just quite happy just, you know, carrying on doing what we're doing. And I think that, you know, the way in which I think about advertising is we need to reframe it. And I think we need to do the same thing here. Instead of talking about oh, yeah, the potential of gain, the potential of this kind of, you know, extra gain that McKinsey are talking about, we're going to say, well, what's the cost of not doing it? You know, what's going to happen to your business if you don't do it? You know, that's the risk. That's when, you know, that's how the lawyers and accountants talk about it, and the consultancies. You know, this is going to cost you lots of money. And we've seen that a little bit in the last year in terms of consumers actually walking away from brands and making a stand. And that's when action's really happening. When people are going, hang on a minute, this is real. Because I think that the reality is with a lot of FTSE 100 businesses is they're going for 10%. And they're going for 10% growth. They're going for steady ship with a little bit of an increase rather than the 30-40% potential gains. And you see probably the biggest amount of change in the most kind of innovative companies out there who are just really kind of like looking to really push and drive things. And I think it's really interesting because there's always also this talk, and I saw a question pop up in the chat as well about this kind of like type of leader. I think there is a difference between entrepreneurs and managers and those kind of different leaders. Rob mentioned about looking for people with drive and ambition and all the rest of it, which are all the kind of the personality attributes. But I think sadly, the closer you get to a lot of board levels, actually, they're looking for managers, good managers, people to keep the ship steady, rather than potential mavericks that might make might set a little bit of risk, but might gain you 30-40% with their kind of their difference in terms of what they're bringing into the mix. So I think that that's a really important thing. And I think that the other thing is as well is I'm glad to hear what Rob's doing, but I'm more in a camp, and Colette's point about transparency is really important because I'm more in a camp now about saying, let's, let the examples be great examples of the winners, the ones that are doing it well, let them fly, and let's shine a light on the ones that are flying because of it. And I don't say that just because, in terms of, oh, that makes it great, we've got these kind of hero companies, but I'm saying that more for the talent. So the talent can understand the companies that they're going to be working in and what they're offering, because I think that's the real smart move in terms of really ultimately there is enough talent out there and everyone knows that it's ever recruited anyone that's good. There's a point at which it flips where you're like, hang on a minute, I'm selling to them now, because I really want them. They've got choices. They've got real choices and they're going to make a real difference to your business. And I think that's the way we got to start thinking about diversity, actually just making sure that the champions actually really do know what are the better companies that are going to look after them. And what it leads to, I think, is in terms of role models and in terms of, inspirational figures, that whole kind of thing of, you can't be what you can't see. That's completely true. But also all these kind of stats and figures about, what you can gain by diversity. I think they're completely inaccurate, really, because we don't know the potential diversity because we've never had a position in these kind of companies where there's this kind of like enough numbers to have this kind of psychological safety to be yourself in a diverse form and really fully contribute and bring your complete self to the table and contribute to that company. And that's not just at the highest level, that's all throughout the whole company as well. And there's been some great studies about, gender diversity where exactly the same thing's been proven. You have one woman in a group of 10, that woman is not contributing her full self or more than to her full kind of capability. As soon as those numbers get closer to reflecting, real life, so actually they can actually feel like it's a normal kind of environment and they've got that permission to be themselves, and it's respected and it's valued, then that's when you see the true value of it. And I refer to the music industry kind of like pre-1959 when was the year that Motown formed. It's a bit like music was then and what it is now. It's gone on that journey where actually, not that the music industry solved all the problems, but the creation and the artists and the collaborations and the difference is just a reflection of what, other industries can be and where they can get to. And so that brings me on to just in terms of diverse speakers, because I think that someone mentioned as well about, I think in the chat, and I'll try and cover this off a bit, about taking responsibility. I do believe that actually, ethnic minorities and people in leadership have got to take responsibility to help to solve this problem as well. The question of, how many ethnic minority people have you employed? I think everyone should be asking themselves that question. But also, I think in terms of, what as Frank kind of said, like who handed the baton or who passed the baton on to, I think that's a real thing that, we've got to think about. And so diverse boards is actually something that came off the back of diverse speakers. Really, it's there to say, look, there are people out there. And there's no kind of excuse for not being able to find people. And I think that the quickest way you diversify and show that kind of like leadership role model kind of thing where people can be inspired to know there is a path to the top is with non-exec directors. So diverse boards is something that we're about to launch, which is about getting non-exec directors onto boards across all industries. It's not just for the creative industry. But sometimes it's even better when you get people from outside of your industry that can add that kind of like difference into it. And there's absolutely no excuse for not having a non-exec direct board who can just make sure you're checking yourself at the right points and times. They don't have to be the diversity officer. They can be something completely different, but they're there, and they're a position that you're going to make you think twice about everything you do. So yeah, so that's one of the things. And also, actually, just on one of the kind of the things that Rob mentioned, I mean, with that as well, you've got to also appreciate the fact that not everyone's completely ready for the position because they've never necessarily had that opportunity. But what we're trying to do is to incorporate coaching into it. We've got a board ready and a board riser program, which helps people understand what's necessary to basically deal and hopefully sustain their position in that place.
Yeah. Thank you, Dina. I mean, reflecting on two of those things you said, firstly, I find it astonishing. Advertising industry is meant to reflect the people they're selling to, yet we are the least diverse of many industries out there. I don't know how we can do our job properly, but also as employers, we all talk about having great employer brands and, being a great place to work because we give back to community, or a great place to work because, it should just be the norm. It should just be something that we do. I think, Frank, some of the things that Dino touched on definitely talk to the head, going back to your original analogy about head and heart. I'm wondering, what do you see businesses do to affect change to the heart? What are the initiatives that people can bring in, and what are the things that we just challenge that kind of the fact that we don't have the same circles as some of those other people? What are the things we need to challenge?
Yeah. So first thing, if I go back to something Dino had said about the need for coaching and getting people up to speed. I know this is a love fest, but I actually disagree with that. Because in fact, from my work and a lot of research, what you find is that Black and Asian staff tend to be overqualified and over-credentialized for the role, so that they're more than ready. So it's not that they're not ready, they need coaching up. And indeed, the basic analysis is that when companies are hiring or promoting white males tend to get promoted because of their potential. Black and Asians and females tend to get promoted based on performance. So we are there typically, and it's that disparity that the white counterpart is looked at because they have potential, yet we're still stuck there a year behind or 2 years more because we have to prove at our performance. So I'm not sure the coaching is necessarily
Frank, and I think that's a really good kind of accurate point. But I think that we can't underestimate in terms of the confidence knock, or the lack of the people feeling they have the confidence for the required position. And I think that is quite common. They are overqualified, but they actually often don't feel like they're qualified enough because of the rejections and the lack of being able to get to that top position as easy as they probably should have, which I think in terms of the coaching can help to install that sense of you deserve to be there. You've got that qualification, you deserve to be there, and rock it and stick it out.
Yeah, still disagree. So, so I'm going to answer your question, Liam, but if I can come back on that a bit. So there's another issue at stake here, and it's a definitional issue, is that we talk about inclusion quite a bit. Most companies are not doing inclusion. 99% of companies are doing assimilation. And that's exactly the issue, why you have to do that. And the difference is, very quickly, assimilation says we hire this diverse talent pool and we're going to bring them up to speed quickly to, this is the way we do things here at Widget Company. This is how our leadership behaves. This is what it takes to become a leader. These are our HR policies, our engagement. Here's our expense reporting system, our financial reporting system. We're going to create all these programs to get, even though you're different looking than us, we're going to create these programs to assimilate you as quickly as possible. Inclusion says we have this multi-generational, multiracial, multi-social identity, diverse population. As somewhat to what Rob is speaking to, we're going to challenge our leadership behaviors and norms, our structures, our HR policies, our engagement processes, and we're going to move that so this diverse workforce glides into this organization and their careers. I guess to your point, Liam, the issue is that I guess one has to kind of figure out, what are we dealing with? And that heart issue and that head issue. What you're dealing with is everyone's belief, my belief, everyone on this panel, everyone in the audience believes they got their job because they're the best at it. Now, when the majority is white, able-bodied, heterosexual male, there's the strong belief this is a meritocracy. Yeah. And we got it because white, able-bodied males are just the smartest people in the world, and so that's why they're at the top of the organization. So you're starting to have to deal with the whole issue of the cognitive dissonance, that you're not there because you're the most talented person in the world. There's the issue of white privilege and the things that come by that. And so part of that is, to Colette's point a bit, is that you have to challenge, and I mean, it's how I describe my management consulting firm. We challenge the myth of meritocracy. That is your starting point in the discussion, is challenging the myth of meritocracy. So you challenge that through data. You show that when we plot our annual performance reviews, we find that Black staff are lower rated than white staff. We find that Black staff are leaving in higher numbers than white staff. You then have qualitative conversations around the lived experience of the employees, and you find the microaggressions. You find that people change their names to come into the workplace, to be accepted, to make it easy for people to deal with them. And so the starting point is at a headline level, you challenge the myth of meritocracy, because that is what you're fighting, is the system's belief of the status quo, and that their industrial processes have produced the most talented person in that senior position. And so you have to destack that myth of meritocracy.
Go on, Frank, sorry.
Yeah, and then the last thing is that it's also not about them. There's an elephant in the room here. There's a us to it. So there's a powerless 100. There's the involved is Suki's going out with his list of top 100 ethnic minority role models, so forth and so on. And we have had Black CEOs. We need to start pulling, letting the ladder down. I would say anybody on the power list next year needs to prove that they've hired a Black person on their team who's a potential successor. What have we done as a community, to be quite honest, to create the pipeline to hand that baton to and off to? So we can talk about the white majority and that myth of meritocracy, but there's another lever that we haven't really pulled and no one really talks about, is that as a Black community, what are we doing to let the ladder down and for others? So are we insisting on that diverse shortlist, or are we afraid as a Black manager to hire that Black employee, because then people are going to say, ooh, a little favoritism there, and maybe they're not qualified. So 3 different answers to your one question, Liam. But,
and all three brilliant, Frank, and you're getting a lot of love in the chat box as well. And I think the very debate between Dino and yourself is, I think there are so many different ways you can come at it. And I think the interesting thing that I take out what you said there is challenge the myth of meritocracy. And Rob, George has asked a question here that I think you can maybe speak to both these points. What challenges do you face when you unbuckle and you unbolt the system from within? And I've heard people say, oh, well, you're not going to get a job these days if you're a white bloke. It's just not going to happen. How do you challenge that whole, if you turn the world on its head and challenge that myth of meritocracy and evoke that change? How do you challenge, what are the challenges you faced, and how do you deal with that? Big question. Sorry, Rob, and you're on mute. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, it goes back to the pyramid and the heads of, because where we did have maybe a global head of paid media, it's now that steering group. And what it does is it means that we can have multiple chief solutions officers who help us with our paid media or our earned media or our analytics. And what it is that it's not having to displace people. So we can still have people and the profile of the company. We're just actually creating that cognitive and cultural diversity, and that decision making gets everyone the exposure. And I'm going to have to sort of empathize with what Dina was saying, is because exposure, no amount of qualification, if you weren't given the exposure to be able to address, because that is the thing. I was asked a question on how do the existing managers feel when you put them in a steering group, and suddenly what I find is that they realize that we're looking for true value exchange. And at that time, it was the exposure and the knowledge you get from that exposure that was being used to keep you in that position. It wasn't actual talent or your contributions and the outcomes from your actions. It was simply the fact that you were getting that exposure, and you continue to make the decision on how much of that knowledge, the power, the empowerment, the accountability. We still had the same people who were deciding how much of that they distributed and how much opportunity and empowerment they gave other people. We've taken that away. Somebody can come in and they can, based on their outcomes, they can continue to achieve. So, and I was also asked, what's taken so long? Well, it's taken like 18 to 19 months to facilitate this type of change. And we've gone through the change curve. I mean, it's been a real challenge to get people to understand leadership, leading by example, and to be outcome focused. But it's not really a challenge until you get to the sort of scale that we're talking about. When we were a smaller business, I can influence all of that, and it was very results driven, and the value that you add. And it's the large companies, and also we needed to have as many people to then spot the talent and start to give that exposure. And it's difficult to answer exactly when things change and we hit that scale where we needed to think about it. And for all the geeky people out there, or people who sort of all the graphic designers, I describe Jellyfish as creating a vector image, not a JPEG. We had to create something that as it scales, it will keep its integrity, it will keep its formation, and we can blow it up to the side of a building or the whole world, as opposed to the JPEG that starts to degrade and lose its integrity. And so a lot of when we decided, we were thinking about what does Jellyfish look like as a 10,000 person organization, and how do we not become all of those organizations that we're discussing today. And so that, I hope, answered some of them.
It definitely does, Rob. And I'm not geek enough. I'm definitely a geek, but I'm not geek enough to know the difference between a vector. But I know JPEGs are trash. So I get your point about not losing that absolute clarity of vision as you get bigger, and making sure that you're delivering what you stood for back then, you're still delivering that as you scale. One of the things we talk about, I have to remind, if she's on, I'll get in trouble about this, I have to remind Jenny about this quite a lot. When we're 50 people, your spider's web is really small, so you can get from one end of it to the other really quickly. When you're 200, we're only 220, right? But that spider's web's huge, and if you're from there to there, you're going to lose sight of what, and I think that is what you're talking about, is making sure you've got the right people in place to drive that change. Colette, coming to you, I've got half my good eye on the time. Colette, in terms of, we've had Deccan's asked a question about imposter syndrome, and when you look around and there's people, you're the only one, and how do you not feel like that? And I think Emma Ramji, my good friend Emma's asked a good question as well about what happens when you get promoted, or what happens when you get put in a picture, or how do you know it's not just because you're a person of colour?
Yeah, really good. Both are really good questions. And I said to Liam, I'm going to tackle them together, because I think they come from the same place, which is this. So first of all, my take on imposter syndrome, it's not all. Imposter syndrome is, I feel like when we call it imposter syndrome, it comes from a place of privilege. So I think there are certain groups that do feel imposter syndrome, like we don't feel we're good enough. It's all internalized within. When it comes to I'm going to say, people from, well, I'm going to speak for Black women specifically. I can't speak for all Black women, nor am I going to. But when I do personal brand work, we talk about this a lot. Actually, what we have experienced as being in the field as imposter syndrome is often as a result of deliberate and structural inequity, gaslighting, and people actively telling us that we're not good enough, or showing us that we're not. It's not imposter syndrome just in our heads. It's not that. It fuels the same feelings as imposter syndrome, but actually it is externally driven. And I think it's really important to kind of just clarify that this is not just on you. That being said, there's a really good Maya Angelou quote, which I'm just going to actually read because I really love it and I always get it wrong, which is, so you may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. And this is kind of the way that I see this stuff about worrying about being the only one in the room, worrying about it, is that you can't control the room necessarily that you walk into. You can influence the rulers, as Frank said, the room, by, for example, bringing other people up with you and bringing people in with you. That's a really good way to, but you can't control it. What you can control is how you show up. So for my advice, and I try and live by this as well, and always have in organizations, is to super understand your strengths. Understand your strengths and understand how you can show up in your own distinctive and unique way. So work on, people call it personal brand. I do work on personal brand. And when I mean it, I mean who you are, what you stand for, and how you do stuff brilliantly. I don't mean some of the garbage that's talked in terms of fake it till you make it. None of that, not that. I mean, absolutely own your strengths and sit in them. Really recognize that. Don't feel the pressure, as Frank talked about, to assimilate, because actually if you are trying to show up there as, being funny, there's no way I can ever enter a room and show up as a white guy. It ain't just not gonna happen. People want that from, people have wanted that from me. I've got feedback in the past when I have been walking into boardrooms and people are like, you just seem a bit, and it's basically like, you're not a white man and we don't like it, Colette. Ain't nothing I can do about that. What I can do is actively play to my strengths and own the things that maybe people have told me in the past are disadvantages, and translate and actually recognize they are strengths and they're part of who I am. Like, for example, my openness and honesty was something when I was in advertising, I was told was not the thing to do and not to get ahead, when in fact it's a little bit of a superpower, and as brand by me, it really helps me thrive. So I guess in answer to the person that asked about imposter syndrome, I said, I think my thing is to really work on kind of honing and understanding your strengths, and really just and work on sort of embedding them and understanding how you can demonstrate them. The point that and I'm with Frank in terms of you know, making sure that you know, you are kind of bringing other people in too. So, and actually that's my final point about tokenism. I feel like some of the conversation sometimes about tokenism is designed to make people of color feel uncomfortable when they get into these spaces. And I know that and I'm sorry, it might sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, I don't really care at this point, but I do think that's a part of this. So you start to worry, am I a token? Don't worry about whether you're a token. It doesn't matter, you're not a token if you are there, stepping into your strength, leading and bringing others in. You are never a token. So let that be your priority. Let that be your priority, rather than worrying about why I'm there or not. Don't matter why you're there. Actually use the fact that you're there as an opportunity to shine, be your best brilliant self, and hopefully along the way bring and create opportunities for others, because I feel really strongly that, you know, I think everyone should be doing that, you know, whether it's allyship for us, you know, that is how we should show up for you know, our white counterparts. That's about allyship, but actually that's how we should all be behaving. And then, you know what, you're not going to be a token, are you? That's end of it for me.
Brilliant, Colette. Thank you. I think that was like a proper preach moment, but absolutely awesome and heartfelt as well. So thank you for sharing that. I guess we're at the end. We're at the end of the show. I don't know whether to call it show, webinar. We'll go with show. It's been an awesome hour, right? I think we could have talked about this for 2 hours. I think the quality of the people on the panel today, we probably haven't done everyone justice with the time we've allotted to it. But thank you so much for, you know, for Frank, for Colette, for Rob and Dino for joining and sharing where you're coming from. I love it when there's disagreement amongst the panel. Everyone's got a different way of approaching it. It's good. It's not a problem. We'll talk about these things and do it in the right way that's good for you and authentic for you. So that's all cool. Colette, your role as director mentoring, and, you know, a lot of people today are chatting. It's great. I love the sound of that. We've got loads of brilliant mentors. Tell us very quickly about what's happening on that.
Yeah, thank you for prompting me. So we are about to start our 2021 mentoring scheme. It will start in the scheme will start in April 2021. We will be recruiting mentees from the second week of March. The scheme is specifically for people of color and people from minoritized ethnic communities who either work in the media industry or who are in a media related role within your organization, either or. If you are interested in having one of our brilliant role models mentor you, please register your interest at mediaforall.org.uk. If you scroll down to the bottom of our homepage, there's a contact form there that just fill in your details. And then what it means is when we sort of launch our mentee registration form, you'll be the first to receive it, which means you might even receive it before the second week of March. Because you know, you'll be there already and ready to go. So that's it. So please, and I would recommend it. Like, I think within organizations, I talked about sponsorship being the really good way to go. If you want, but looking for external support and external networks, I'm going to absolutely shout out MEFA, and I'm going to say our mentoring program. We have some fantastic role models like on our books, and you get the chance to be mentored by just awesome people, and it makes such a difference. So Liam's dropped it into the chat, but please do register your interest now, and you'll hear from us in March.
Wicked. Thank you so much, Colette. And thank you again to our brilliant panelists. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Rob, Dino, and Colette. Our March MEFA Matters is on the 25th again. So the 25th is always the last Thursday of the month. And on the 8th of March, I pray that I've got that right, it's International Women's Day, right? So I hear a lot of organisations are going to do the whole month of March celebrating awesome women. And at Media for All, we're going to do the same. So on the 25th of March, tune in, hear from some brilliant Black, Asian, minority ethnic women coming and telling you how they're absolutely nailing it in what they do. So tune in. Hope everyone has a good weekend and see you all soon. Thank you very much, team. Cheers, guys.